Hi, everyone. This is Jaime Alejandro, and I want to welcome you to the Arts Calling podcast, the place where I interview hardworking independent creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. I have a great show for you today, but before I get to it, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please be sure to stop by the link in the episode description called the Weekly Shoutout. There's great opportunity there for you to discover brand new creatives, folks who are friends of the show, who have a new podcast, a new book, perhaps a new visual project coming out, and I think you're going to love it, so make sure to check it out. Today, I'm so delighted to be Arts Calling singer-songwriter Ciara Lawless. So let me tell you about our guest. From arranging flowers to arranging music, Irish singer and florist Ciara Lawless goes from working in her flower shop by day to arranging music by night, where she writes and records her own music. The Celtic songbird made her mark on the music industry with her debut single, Half the Man, in May of 2023. Since then, Ciara has been sharpening her stage skills, performing at a tremendous number of festivals. Ciara's music journey began at a young age when she started taking classes in acting and singing. She later developed an interest in classical and opera, training at the Academy of Music in Tullamore, where she also competed in national and international competitions. While some singers cut their chops while climbing the music ladder, Ciara earned her singing stripes as a funeral singer, something that she is very proud and honored to have done. With her debut album out now, Ciara Lawless is poised to become one of the most exciting new artists of 2024 and beyond. Her music deals with deep and meaningful themes while remaining uplifting, leaving a positive impact on the listener. Now, I got to tell you folks, this was a great conversation about songwriting, the creative process, and performance. Ciara's a phenomenal performer and songwriter. I urge you to check out her new album, Paint My Soul, which is now available, so click on the links in the episode description. Give it a listen as soon as you can, and you won't regret it. Now, without further delay, let's give Ciara a call. Hi, Ciara. Good morning. How are you?
I'm awesome. So lovely to talk to you.
Yes. So at this time, where are you at these days?
Well, at the moment, I'm actually currently back in studio, working on my second album.
Oh, wow.
I recently just released my, yeah, so it's kind of keeping the creative flow going and very excited for what I'm planning next. I just released my debut album, Paint My Soul, which came out in April. So I've been kind of touring that. I had my debut album launch as well, which was super fun. That was in Dublin. And yeah, so just kind of planning and strategizing and just I'm in the creative flow at the moment.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to interrupt that, because it must be a really exciting time to sort of assess what happened in the first album and then going into the studio for the second one. I imagine there's a lot of different directions that you want to get into now. Maybe what we can do here, just to get the ball rolling, because I would really love to set up a bit of where you came from so that we can talk about those transitions of creativity. Can you share a bit about where you are from and how music plays its way into your life? Because it's a phenomenal story, and I'm sure maybe you can give us the intro of how music became a part of your life.
Yeah, so I suppose growing up, my grandmother actually would have played a big part in my, I suppose, influencing me in the world of music. I would have like spent every summer with her, and she would have been teaching me, like in her best way she could, trying to get me into piano. And she loved the accordion, the piano accordion. So I tried my hand at that. Unfortunately, I didn't stick at the piano accordion, but I loved piano, and she taught me all the scales and working from there. And then I suppose around that time, then I kind of discovered I loved singing. And she really encouraged me like to join different theatre groups. And she was just such an amazing inspiration in my life. She really loved music, and her own story around music is quite fascinating. She played for the Evoke Cayley band, and she's just been such an inspiration in my life, and how she was like loved music, and she really imparted that passion onto me, which has been a huge part of my life. I suppose like anyone, We go through different experiences in life. And for a lot of us, music is our therapy. It's our way of expressing our emotions and, writing what comes into our mind. So it's been a really great creative outlet. And I suppose a brilliant way to kind of channel my experiences in life.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear. And it's always fascinating to look back on somebody's family tree and you find that there is a pillar somewhere where all of this gift, or at least this passion for the art, is embodied in some way. And so it seems like you were certainly the inheritor of that love for the craft. Now, as a songwriter as well, because you write your own music as well, when do you discover your voice at the very onset where you feel like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to express myself through paper, writing lyrics down, or perhaps journaling that becomes a songwriting?
Cool. So, yeah, I think in my teen years, probably around the age of 13 and 14. I know, like, I did love reading poetry growing up. And one day I was going through something and I guess it just kind of happened very randomly that I was struggling with expressing how I felt. And I just picked up the pen one day and I heard a melody in my head and I began to write lyrics around that. And I was like, oh, well, I actually really like this. And then I kind of dabbled in it, but I didn't really start taking it seriously until I was about 17. And I began kind of really writing then around that point and looking into melodies and being very curious about the whole world of songwriting and original music. And so I started looking at different conferences then when I left school. I went to Meedham, which was in the south of France, in Cannes, and I kind of started to learn about the copyright side of things. YouTube has been an amazing resource though, because we watch and we learn from other musicians with their stories from the past when it comes to the legalities of music. So I started to really kind of look into all of that side of things and learn about collaboration. It led me to go to the Galway. It was called the International Galway Songwriting Camp. It was a once-off camp that happened back in 2020, actually a week before we went into lockdown.
Oh, wow.
And that was my first. Yeah, so it was such an amazing thing to happen, and our timing was like so fantastic, really, because everything after that, then it really kind of impacted my experience through lockdown because I was able to be creative. I was able to work with others that I had met in the camp and continue this online writing space where I could write. And we wrote some beautiful songs together, co-written with many artists at the camp. And I started to really learn then at that point about the skill of songwriting and how one part of it is the experience that inspires you, but then there's the other part of it, which is really honing in on the skill of it and the meter of it and how the rhythm and the grammar and everything fits, is kind of shaped around the melody. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll write a song and there won't be any editing to be done on it. It'll just flow out of you within 20 minutes. But then other times you're really working on the skill of it. And you might write a phrase that fit the situation at the time, but you'll come back and you'll go, rhythmically, I can do better than that. So you'll kind of change words, and a song really goes on a journey, especially when it goes into the production stage in the studio. It then takes on a whole other form and meaning. And especially when you have other people getting involved as well, like the producer, that creative flow in the studio. It's a fascinating process for me, and I'm constantly learning. And you can always learn, I find, from others. Collaboration, I find, is an amazing way to, really work on your skill of songwriting and looking at things from different angles, especially when it comes to structures, because definitely if you're writing alone, a lot of the time you can find yourself getting stuck in this, same structure of a song: verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, where, working with others really gets you to kind of open up to the world of different styles of writing. And yes, it's quite fascinating for me, and I'm constantly learning every day.
This is fascinating timing with the songwriting journey sort of segueing into the pandemic. At what point in time did you feel like you were ready for the album production, or how did that conversation come about? And when did you feel ready to take that step of doing the debut album?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, like, one of the my first release, which was called Half the Man, that was inspired by my grandmother. that was actually written in during the camp, we'll say back in 2020. And I wanted
Mm,
that song to be my first release. And you'll hear it kind of in the instrumentation of that song. There is kind of a folky feeling to it, but also a slight theatrical feeling to it as well. Because again, my grandmother, she played in the Evoke Cayley band, but she also had a very strong passion for musical theatre. And we would have spent many evenings watching all the black and white films and the musicals like The Sound of Music and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and all of those fabulous films. And I really wanted that to be a tribute to her mark that she left on me in the world of music. So released that as my first song that was written from the camp. But the great thing, I suppose, during COVID was I was actually working, I pivoted an awful lot. So I was working actually in my own flower store at the time. And I was it was again working behind closed doors like many people. We couldn't have people in our physical store. A lot of stores closed. So I was working from an online predominantly basis. And I pivoted as well in other ways with the music because I began singing for funerals.
mm,
And
wow.
again, yeah, and it's probably one of my, they're such a fond experience to look back on because, while it's a sad occasion, it's also a celebration of a person's life. And funerals were often reduced to like maybe 20 people. And then it went down to less. I think at one point there was maybe only 10 people allowed at a funeral. And I think there was another occasion where there was maybe only 5 or 6. So when you're singing in the gallery and you're realizing that, it's a very special position to be in when you're, one of those very few numbers that are there to celebrate this person's life. And I remember a fascinating experience happened one time when I was singing at the microphone. A little butterfly came down out of nowhere and just landed on the microphone. And
Mm,
little experiences like that used to happen. And my mind would just be blown about how it was such a beautiful and honorable thing to be able to sing at someone's celebration of their life. And especially in a time where it was so heartfelt. Many people, as we know, will travel from far and near to mourn a loved one and celebrate their last moments. And, to have been able to play a little part in that in some way at a time that was very delicate when families couldn't travel and friends and neighbors couldn't come. That was, yeah, it was really poignant experience for me and definitely inspired a lot of me when it came to writing lyrics and thinking deeper about life and the meaning of life and death. And yeah,
right, right.
it really made me contemplate a lot.
Oh, I bet. And it's such a beautiful service to be able to provide to your community and to the people around you. I actually am a firm believer that we need to take this approach for these end of life sort of celebrations because it can be fairly dour, but I think at its core, as you say, it is a beautiful celebration. And doing this album, then you have your songs ready to go, and then you go into production. How did you rediscover your music as it was implemented into a recording? Because I'm sure that that's a whole new transformation where, as you say, you bring a lot of new collaborators in and immediately I guess you start seeing your music differently. Is that sort of how it works?
Yeah, well, I think the subject of your music definitely grows as you grow. So, music that I would have been writing when I was a teenager wouldn't have been, a lot of that has kind of gone in the drawer, and it was a brilliant starting off place for me just to get to kind of um, step into that space of writing. And you kind of have to keep, writing is very much the trial and error. You have to keep, um, practicing and keep working on that skill. I suppose poets write many, many poems, and I'm sure not every poem makes the book. But, when it comes to songs, the ones that I chose for this album, I actually had an amazing co-writing partner, Oisin Brown, with me on a lot of these songs, and there was other songs that I wrote alone as well. And I found that the process really of recording, you have a lot of elimination of songs. So, for example, we recorded 15, 16 songs, and then only 10 made it onto the album. So the other ones have gone to the drawer. Now, I may revisit some of them songs later down the line, but the way I see a song, it's like an artist that paints a painting. You can't be attached because once it goes out into the world, it's for everybody. And I think the beauty with songwriting is that sometimes we write songs for ourselves, sometimes we write songs for the world, and then sometimes we just write songs out of pure, let's write a song. So it's yeah, you'll have different types of songs and different reasons for writing. So the album itself really reflects on themes of self-love, um, all different types of love. I was also kind of diving into mythology and Celtic studies, and I was fascinated by, some of these stories of these really poignant features in history and in our mythology. I'll take Queen Maeve for an example, in Irish mythology, her powerful story and the resilience. We also look at, like, the goddess of Bridget and her story. Later she was, I suppose, as Catholicism came into Ireland, they called her Saint Bridget. So even the transition of that, and she was a patronage of the arts, and her whole ethos and her belief, um, also kind of, her story interweaved into my mindset a lot when I was writing these songs. And I was very inspired. A song like I Am Your Healer, which is on my album, which was my first track release off the album. That song was heavily inspired by Greek mythology as well, and the comparison with Irish mythology. And I think there's so many lessons and powerful metaphors in these stories. And if we give it the time to really, read these stories, every time you read something, you might pick up on something new. And that exploration for me was fascinating, especially when it comes to the ego and understanding what that is. And I feel like there's always room to dive into things and keep learning and looking at things from different perspectives.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. And I'm glad you touched on sort of the basis, or at least the spirit of the album. And I'll take this opportunity to congratulate you on the album. I had the pleasure of listening to it. It's such a delightful and, as you're saying, soulful experience. But there is this undercurrent of story that you don't seem to stray away from. Maybe it could be sort of that dramatic background, but I love that in a previous interview you described the album as soul pop with a sprinkle of folk. And I think you've encapsulated that perfectly in that response. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit about additional influences that came into it, because there is a touch of 80s, a little bit of 80s, and of
Yeah.
course, you have your own style, but maybe you can share some things that you were listening to that sort of give us that 80s inspiration.
Yeah, so growing up, I suppose I would have studied classical and opera singing in the Academy of Music in Tullamore in Ireland. And around that time, I was kind of listening a lot to actually Kate Bush at the time. And I was very inspired by her style of singing because, we often hear Kate's voice. She has those slight classical elements. And for me, that was a lovely bridge because while I actually love, and I really love a lot of classical and opera and theatre music, it was quite rare for me to hear a lot of pop music that kind of had nearly that vocal crossover. So I was listening to a lot of Kate Bush. I also loved Stevie Nicks, all the amazing 80s singers, like, Pat Benatar, and even some of the 90s and early 2000s, Amy Lee from Evanescence, all those amazing songwriters and vocalists, female vocalists that had that power behind them. You even think of Cher, and they have that resilience in their voice. Celine Dion. I just grew up listening to all those kind of powerhouse vocalists, and I just loved, the passion that they sung with. And so that definitely influenced me a lot when it came to the vocals. You'll definitely hear one or two tracks as well, which are kind of, the music is definitely Phil Collins kind of inspired, because I would have loved a lot of Phil Collins music as well growing up. Anything the 80s, I just really love. And that definitely filtered through my music, but also kind of, I would have loved a lot of folk music growing up. I definitely listened to Taylor Swift in my younger years. So I think elements of the folk there
Sure.
definitely would have trickled through quite a bit too.
Yeah, and I have to say the one of my favorite tracks on this album is "Human Angels." I felt it had this tender optimism that I couldn't get over, and I found that even though you're getting these big, broad, dramatic strokes of music, there is such a tenderness, a humanity across a lot of the tracks, and I'm curious how you were able to refine the voice, or at least the perspective that you wanted to share on the album Did you feel that you had it pretty close by the time these songs came out into the world? Did you listen to the tracks and say, "Okay, this is the best that we can make it, and this is exactly what I wanted it to be," or was there a shift in personality or perspective, once the songs came out?
So the recording process, it's fascinating because you'll go in with a song and you might have a certain, you might hear a certain kind of way it's going to go in your mind. And then what happens is when you actually begin to work on it, you realize actually, hold on, if I just release a little bit of control here and just allow the creative flow
Mm,
to happen in studio between producer, myself, and my manager also stepped in there as well. So it was amazing to kind of watch that whole process unfold. Like anything, there'll be your ups and your downs in your studio. I used to find sometimes that I might have written a song and it could have been about something totally different, but I might have went through an experience and suddenly the lyrics meant something else to me. So I was able to kind of bring that emotion into the songs when I was singing them. But you definitely like it's the recording process is it's fascinating because things can change so much, and a song that you might once have went a certain way with it when it came to tempo and when it came to instrumentation, it'll take its own shape. So
mhm.
definitely it takes like the first time you go into studio, it takes a while for you to understand your sound and where you want to head with everything. And I definitely wanted to create something that was fresh and that was my own, and that again, you have to be able to love what you're making. I truly believe that because if you can love it and you release it out into the world, the people who resonate with that would also love it too.
And certainly they did. I feel like it's been getting a lot of positive receptions, and if I may dilly-dally here on this songwriting aspect of it, or at least the production part of it,
Yeah,
I'm curious if you had a problem song in production where you felt like this is just not working, but still made it onto the album. Were there songs that you really had to break apart, or one in particular that you recall that you had to overcome like that? Something that was really almost insurmountable that ended up being maybe something included in the album.
actually, I have the perfect song for that question. A song called "Paint My Soul," which is actually the name of the album.
Right.
That yeah, yeah. So, and it's funny because that's now my favorite song on the album. We went through a kind of a I think it was the second or third, maybe it was a third or fourth song that was recorded on the album. And obviously, again, we were kind of still delving the sound, and there's kind of a bit of soft rock that kind of goes in there, but there's also a bit of soul in that song. There's a slight bit of folk, pop. It definitely has a good few elements to it. But when we first recorded it, I really loved it. And then what happened is I started to go along and record other songs. I started to question, will it fit in and will it work on the album? Will it sound cohesive with the rest of the material, or will it kind of stick out? And so we kind of, we parted aside. We probably visited after about 4 months, 5 months. We went back at it again, and then we kind of once we got the vocals laid down and kind of started to work around it and bring the album more into that kind of 80s. We finally found a place for it, and then of course, then when it came to choosing the title for the album, it just stood out to me as I love that because the album really has done that. It's painted me. The whole process has changed my life, and I definitely don't feel like I'm the same person from the start of the recording to now. It's really brought me on such a growth journey. I've learned a lot about myself because I think that's what art does. When you express yourself through art, you can learn so much about yourself.
That's a beautiful sentiment, and I'm sure that it allows you to have some newfound strength as you go and you share these songs into the world. It's been out for a couple of months now, but you went to the festival circuit and you did do a lot of performances, I imagine, in the last couple of months. What was that experience like getting out there and bringing these songs to people?
Yeah, so that it's the funnest part about it because when you get to perform a song and finally see, how the audience is connecting with it, you definitely take on a whole different meaning to your songs. I know there's many artists that talk about that. They might have had a song where they didn't realize that one was going to connect the most with the audience. And, a song for me that does that is the song called Answer. It seems to be
Mm,
a song that really resonates with people and they really seem to kind of, you know, just enjoy that one when I perform it. And I had one or two people sing it back to me at one time. And that was, again, that just blew my mind because, one thing is a lot of the time when you're writing this music, you might have been going through an experience and at one part that song was difficult for you to sing. And then suddenly when you're performing it, the more and more you're doing it live, it becomes effortless and it takes on its own meaning. And it really truly is a shared piece with the audience, which I really love that. So, yeah.
You strike me as somebody who's able to let go of that ownership quite easily. And you just say, this doesn't belong to me anymore. And I think that's a wonderful perspective to have, especially when you spend so much time creating something and ultimately it is an offering, isn't it?
Yeah, I totally agree with that because I think it's easy for a lot of us to get caught up in perfection. And maybe that's where, like, I've been someone as well that kind of struggled with perfection a lot all my life, but I'm kind of getting to a better, comfortable place with it. And I think as an artist, you have to be able to let go because if you don't, there's many songs, believe it or not, that are sitting in drawers all around the world that are absolute hits. But sometimes a songwriter will go, oh, it's not finished yet, or I need to look at this way, or they might have those self-sabotaging behaviors of I'm not going to put it out there because sometimes we're afraid of success or we're afraid of putting it's an emotional, quite a vulnerable thing to wear your heart on your sleeve and put out a song. So I think once you kind of get over that initial phase of maybe perfectionism or that fear of putting something out there, I think, it's a beautiful space to be able to finally step into because, as I said, there's many songs out there that are sitting in drawers that have stories and beautiful stories to tell. And I think it's important, like the painter that paints the picture and hangs it on the wall. It's important to release our music and our expression into the world because there's definitely a chance someone out there might hear it or see it or connect with it in some way and it can change their day because that's the ability that music's had for me. And I know for many people to connect with a place in ourselves that maybe we do not have words for, or that words are not accessing.
Absolutely. We need the language. And I want to thank you for educating us in that regard because that's what the arts are for. And I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. You said something that really struck me in an interview recently about how you were able to take some of the experiences that you had, working in a flower shop, because that is the family business, right? That was something that was a part of your life for a while. I love the way you frame this perspective of taking all of those skills that you acquired as a business owner and transmitting them over or transferring them over to your music career, because we forget how much of a business this is. And I just love that was a very astute way of looking at yourself as a business, because we have to be realistic and many of us fail to see that. Can you share sort of what that was like? Because that mentality, I'm sure, was beneficial in getting this project taken care of and your career started.
Absolutely. And it's something I'm constantly learning about because there's no necessarily a guidebook when it comes to the music industry and how to navigate because there's so many different avenues. You've got the songwriting side of it, you've got the sync side of it, you've got the performance aspect of it, and some people want to be cover artists, some people want to be in a wedding band or a music band, and there's just so many different ways to go about it. Others want to just release music and maybe not perform live. There's the merch streams, there's the whole PR side of things and how to promote yourself. And I definitely think, I think it's an easy thing to say that everybody, I think from time to time maybe struggles with putting themselves out there and promoting themselves. But I think when it comes to something like flowers or selling flowers, we look at it and go, it's so beautiful. I'm sure people will love this and I'll put it up and people will smile at it. And I think when it comes to music, we have to kind of nearly, make ourselves think that way as well about it and be able to see it as a product. Yes, it's an emotional thing, I suppose, in your song and you have an attachment to it. But I think to release that attachment around it is very important after you've gone through the whole creative process of getting it produced and put out into the world. At that point, if you want to, I suppose, achieve a sustainable income with music, you have to be able to look at the business side of things. And it's definitely, a whole other way of looking at things. I heard someone say to me before, before anyone thinks of doing a music degree, a business degree would be better probably to do beforehand.
Right.
And I totally agree. I totally agree with it because as an artist, we're wearing so many hats. You're designing, you know, well, take a painter, for example, they're writing down, they're sketching the drawing first. They're thinking about colors. They're thinking about the mood of the painting. They're thinking about, you know, what is the customer ordering, or maybe they're commissioning it, or they're doing it for themselves. But there's so many different hats you have to wear. And the whole process is really in depth. To even then, after all that, and when the painting's finally finished and go into the framing of it, to have the mindset that to go, okay, well, actually, how am I going to sell this? Where am I going to sell this? And what is the best way to deliver this? That's a whole other landscape, and it may not necessarily be taught. It's something we kind of have to learn. And artists are often the people that are sometimes, that they have that dreamy um, ability to be able to kind of dream and to have that creative flow. And sometimes it's hard to have the business aspect of the brain going at the same time. So I don't believe it was something I was naturally good at. It's something I've learned over time, because it can be learned. Business is definitely a skill. Um, and I think, yeah, to be able to connect with people, the art obviously will do that. The song, that's the job of the song, is to connect with the person. But your job as an artist is to best find ways to show it to the world. And then after that, if the right person will hear it, the right people will like it. It's not about trying to connect with everybody. But it's definitely about, knowing how can I show this to the world, and keep, learning. I think you can learn from others, you can learn from other artists to be inspired. We're very lucky today now, we have the world of social media. Artists back in the past, unless you got a record deal or you were gigging all over the place, it was very hard to get your music out there. Where now we have this fantastic tool of social media that's free, and anyone can connect with any artist from around the world. I recently joined an app called Threads, and I work part-time as a community radio presenter. And it was amazing because I got to connect with different artists from around the world and bring them on the show and play some of their music. And it's just fascinating that if we didn't have the internet, that never would have happened.
Right. And certainly I had the pleasure of meeting you on Threads. I think that was when I'm finally making my way over there, and that was just wonderful to have the pleasure to connect with you. Now I have a couple more questions, to be mindful of your time here, but I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation. I was really excited, certainly concerned, because of the time difference, that we weren't going to make it happen. But as you're moving to the next phase, the next album, what are you looking to do differently? It seems like putting out an album, touring it, and doing all kinds of business work around it, there's countless lessons and things, I'm sure. But perhaps even stylistically, what are you looking to achieve with this album, or how are you looking to do it? Because it seems like you've come full circle on the first one.
I think a little bit what I said earlier about as you grow, so your material grows. And I feel like, I'm learning. I'm having gone through the experience of the first album. I have a few more, items on my do's and don't lists of what works and what doesn't work. And for me, really, I kind of want to always have the mindset of how can I improve? How can I get better? How can I strengthen my knowledge? How can I strengthen my use of words, of my ear when it comes to like listening? So I find myself now at the moment, I'm listening to a lot more of different types of material and different types of genres that I may not necessarily always listen to. Now I'm starting to kind of work on bringing new sounds into my awareness. So I think it's really important to kind of, there are little simple ways that you can kind of start to broaden your understanding of different melodies and you get more ideas and be more creative. And I think someone once said that it really kind of opens up your creative inspiration when you listen to different types of music. So I'm planning to, I suppose, constantly work on improving. And when it comes to the material, I have the songs selected, but just like probably the process of the first album, I'll probably record about maybe 13 to 15 songs, and then I'll, wind it down to the best 10. So I think that process of elimination is always very important because you want to have quality over quantity. And, I'm always writing. I wrote something last week as well. So I keep writing and keep allowing life to inspire me. Um, but I'm looking forward to kind of embracing the changes that come with the recording process and what's coming next. I'm very excited for a little bit different from what I put out on the first album. They're definitely the same kind of themes, I would say, around kind of discovery and love and belief systems. But this one, it's definitely different, I think, instrument wise from the first album, and I'm excited to hear
Mm.
people's reactions or what people think.
I love that you have chosen themes that are so perennial and wonderful that they definitely will have reach. Especially this notion of spirituality. I feel like maybe that is a big part of your life. You mentioned in the past that you do meditation, and that is a big aspect of your mental health. Do you ever get bogged down or feel like there are tools that have helped you overcome any kind of difficulties when you see that things aren't going well in your career, or maybe things that you kind of feel are foundational to your mental health?
Yeah, so meditation for me has been really important. I also I love to read a lot. So I have kind of some books that I really kind of connect well with. I'm working on reading The Four Agreements again at the moment. So that's kind of a book
That's
that's really
great.
kind of stood out to me. Yeah, I really love that book. So that's kind of I'm rereading that. So again, I think a lot of mindset books are really important. They're kind of the area of wellness, I think. I just think as an artist, because I find that maybe part of our journey and our reason for being here is to kind of go through life, and there'll be highs and lows, but it's how you frame them in your mind. It's how you take a perspective on something and allow it to inspire you or challenge you. It'll either do one or the other. It'll inspire you or challenge you. So it's how you frame it in your mind and then act accordingly. So for me, meditation is brilliant. I also love nature, so I love long walks in nature, and it definitely inspires a lot of my writing. Songs like "With Love," I have the first lyric in that is "As the stars begin to fall, distant voices come from afar." And then another one, "As the sun rises up, I feel a freedom on my face." So it's talking about the wind and nature, and I think for everybody, we can all agree, nature is perfect. It just has no flaws. Nature has no flaws, and I was fascinated the other day. I was at a festival, and obviously the whole ground of this tent that we were in was covered over with this kind of wood pulp to
Mm.
stand on. But it was amazing how nature is so resilient and was growing up in any like little kind of gap in the wood pulp that it was growing up through it. So it's amazing how life continues to just thrive, and how we can overcome obstacles, and nature is a great example for that. So definitely a lot of inspiration from the world around me will be going into my next album and my whole process when it comes to how I look at things. And I think I think it was Joni Mitchell or something I was watching recently, and said the job of the artist is just to share their perspective. And it's irrelevant how that lands. So they shouldn't be worried about how that perspective is going to land. It should be geared on sharing their perspective. And I thought that was fascinating. I loved that.
Oh, that's great. So, two more questions here. This one you kind of touched on, and maybe we can sort of pivot a little bit to the big one here at the end. But what else are you experiencing right now that is influencing you in terms of media? The music that you have consumed recently, or perhaps even a film or something new that has come your way that has inspired you.
Hmm. Um, it's funny. I'm on TikTok, but I'm not someone who's scrolling on TikTok. Um, I don't know. I just never really got into it. I made an effort to put up one or two little videos for promotion myself, but I think I'm also someone, I suppose, that doesn't watch much TV. So when it comes to media, depending, I suppose, on what we watch on our algorithms on our Instagram or our social media channels, that's definitely kind of filtered by what we interact with. But artists that are really inspiring me are Florence and the Machine. I also love Olivia Dean, who I think she released an album in 2023 or early 2024. But I just love her music and her whole style and vibe. I think she's such an inspiration. I think she's only about 24, 25 years of age, so not far off my own age. And I'm very inspired by her musically, and the work that she's doing. And what I love is she released a song called I Could Be a Florist. And I definitely resonated a lot with that.
Wow.
I love that. Yeah. So inspiration wise for music, definitely Olivia Dean. We also have an artist in Ireland that's, killing it at the moment. She was recently nominated for a Mercury prize. Her name is CMAT. So I'm listening to a lot of CMAT's music and just fascinated really by the talent that's emerging from the Irish music scene and indeed the UK as well. So I find myself more and more wanting to listen to the smaller artists that are emerging more so than maybe the bigger artists that we always kind of, revert back to. I'm obsessed now with new original music and supporting that because I think it's important. I really do think it's important. We look to the past and people would, attend gigs and really support a lot of emerging artists. And I think we need to come back to that and strengthen our community and support those artists around us that are trying to branch into the music world. And, supporting them means so much to them. And I think, it's exciting, the world of emerging new artists.
That's especially inspiring for me because I feel like we're on the verge of returning to that. Everyone's a little bit frustrated and maybe fed up with the more massive mainstream sort of like traditional angle of things, that it is sort of a return to community. And I just think those are words to live by. But the last question here is more about quality of life. So I ask people, how do you define a life well lived? It doesn't have to be as an artist. It can be as a human being. Anything that improves your quality of life. How do you define that on a day-to-day basis? What gets you going and what gets you through?
I really love this question. For me, my quality of life is determined on how much time I believe I spend in nature, and I spend listening to my inner compass, whether that is, whether you want to call it your intuition or your gut feeling. Nature is something I think we all need to spend more time in nature, whether that's going for a walk, whether that is maybe going for a swim or, bringing, I don't know if someone has a dog, bringing a dog for a walk. I think it's the simple things in life and your appreciation for the simple things that will make you the happiest. I think the goal is not necessarily being happy, because if you chase happiness, you'll probably discover all the things that don't make you happy. But I think the goal is just to be able to appreciate the simple things in life and to be content with who you are inside. That I think is the most important thing. Well, that's what I'm reading all of the time anyway, and I'm trying to embody that as much as I can, is that inner contentment, because I think in this world that is so obsessed with consumerism and materialistic things, I think the simple things in life and coming back to basics is really what's going to matter, because it's very hard to imagine how all these things are going to be so sustainable. And in the world of social media, Lady Gaga refers to it as the toilet of the internet. And I think it's so true. If we get caught up on believing that that's, a real reality, for a lot of us, I think we're in danger of losing ourselves in the midst of all that. So I think it's important to kind of come back to self and basics and nurture your inner heart and your inner contentment with peace.
Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on. But Ciara, I want to thank you so much for not only this beautiful album that you have brought the world. I love the aesthetic of it. I love the message and of course the point of view. It's so refreshing and well defined that it's certainly something that will be part of my rotation regularly. But I also want to thank you for your time and for reminding us that there's so much out there that we can enjoy and appreciate, not only in the natural world, but in independent artist circles. I think there's so much that we could have talked about, and I know we just scratched the surface, but I want to thank you for being awesome, for your work, and for your time.
Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure to be a part of this amazing podcast. I'm super grateful. Have a beautiful day.
You too. Thank you so much. And I will be in touch on the internet. So you take care and we'll talk soon.
Amazing. And I suppose if anyone wants to connect with any more of my music, my social media handles for everybody is at Ciara Lawless HQ.
Wonderful. Well, there it is. Thank you so much, Ciara. And I will talk to you soon. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.